Hello, my old friend. I want you to do something for me. Close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember a specific smell from your childhood. Perhaps it is the earthy scent of canvas liberation shoes drying in the afternoon sun, or the sharp metallic tang of a chipped enamel mug filled with boiling water. Can you hear the heavy, rhythmic clanking of a massive iron bicycle chain? Today we are going to travel back in time. We are returning to the 1970s and early 1980s in China. Together we will gently dust off 20 forgotten things from that era. These are not just objects. They are pieces of our youth, fragments of a world that has quietly slipped through our fingers. And I promise you, by the time we reach the very last item, the beautiful lost art of truly waiting for someone, you will feel a warmth in your chest that you have not felt in a very long time. Before we open this chest of memories, let us pause and remember how time used to flow back then. It moved like a slow, quiet river. We did not have screens flashing in our faces, and we were not constantly rushing from one notification to the next. The days felt long, deliberate, and deeply grounded. Many people today look back at the 1970s in China and see only material scarcity. They think that because we had less money, we lived poorer lives. But you and I know the absolute truth. We were rich in ways that modern society has completely forgotten. Our wealth was not in our bank accounts. It was in the unbreakable bonds with our neighbors, the intense joy of a rare, sweet treat, and the shared resilience of our families. We relied on each other. We borrowed soy sauce, we shared warmth, and we understood the true value of patience. Life was stripped of distractions, leaving only the raw, beautiful, and sometimes difficult reality of living. Now, let us walk down that old alleyway together and remember what made our childhoods so profoundly magical. Let us begin by remembering the delicate, thin slips of paper that once dictated our daily meals, the ration coupons known to us as liang piao. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel the dry, fragile texture of those tiny rectangles between your fingers. Back in the 1970s, money alone could not buy you a sack of rice, a bottle of cooking oil, or a warm bowl of noodles. You needed these precious tickets. I remember how mothers and grandmothers treated them like gold, folding them carefully and hiding them in small, hand-stitched cloth purses tucked deep inside their coats. The ritual of going to the state-run grain store was a solemn affair. You would stand in a long line, clutching your grain and oil coupons, breathing in the dusty, earthy smell of raw wheat and rice that hung heavily in the dim air. When it was your turn, handing over that small piece of paper felt like handing over a piece of survival for your family. It taught us to waste absolutely nothing. We scraped every last grain of rice from our bowls because we knew exactly how much sweat and careful planning went into securing it. These coupons were not just currency. They were a profound symbol of our shared struggle, our endurance, and the quiet dignity with which our parents managed to feed us during the leanest of years. Now let us bring to mind the heavy, majestic presence of the 28-inch bicycle, often the famous Phoenix or Flying Pigeon brand. We called them the big, heavy bars. Do you remember the sheer weight of that black iron frame? It was not just a bicycle. It was the family vehicle, a vital workhorse, and a proud symbol of household status. I can still hear the sharp, clear ring of the metal bell echoing down the street in the early morning fog. As a child, your place was usually sitting sideways on that uncomfortable front crossbar, your small hands gripping the cold metal, while your father pedaled with all his might against the bitter winter wind. You could smell the thick grease on the heavy chain and the scent of your father's cotton coat. These bicycles were built to last a lifetime. When a tire went flat or a spoke broke, we did not throw the bicycle away. We patched the rubber in the courtyard, our hands stained with black oil, washing them afterward with a rough bar of yellow soap. Seeing a row of those heavy black bicycles parked outside a factory gate was the defining image of our cities, a testament to a generation that moved steadily and proudly under their own power. Next, we must talk about an object that sat on every single desk and table, the classic enamel mug. You know exactly the one I mean. It was usually a bright, stark white, adorned with vibrant red peonies, a factory logo, or a bold red star. Over time, these mugs would inevitably drop on the concrete floor, and the white enamel would chip away, revealing the dark, rough iron beneath. Nobody threw them away because of a few chips. In fact, those chips gave the mug its character. I can clearly recall the metallic, almost sweet smell of the mug when it was filled with freshly boiled water. It transferred the heat so perfectly that you had to wrap your cold hands around it gently during the winter, using it as a personal heater before you could even take a sip. You would blow softly on the steaming water, watching the ripples form, waiting for the loose tea leaves to sink to the bottom. Everyone had one, from the factory worker taking a break by the machines to the grandfather sitting in a wicker chair in the courtyard. It was a humble vessel, but it held the warmth and comfort that got us through many long, exhausting days. As the harsh northern winters approached, out came the iconic army green cotton coat. These were not the lightweight fashionable jackets of today. These were heavy, thick shields against the freezing wind. Do you remember how heavy they felt when you slipped them on? The outer canvas was stiff, and the inside was stuffed with thick, dense cotton. When you walked outside on a snowy morning, the streets were a moving sea of olive green. They smelled faintly of raw cotton, old fabric, and the mothballs used to store them over the humid summer months. The collars were wide, often turned up to protect red, wind-burned ears. These coats were passed down from older brothers to younger ones, becoming softer and more faded with each passing year. Sometimes, if a child was freezing, a father would simply unbutton his own green coat and wrap the child inside it against his chest, sharing his body heat. It was a utilitarian garment devoid of any luxury, yet it provided a deep, enveloping sense of security and warmth that no expensive modern winter jacket could ever hope to replicate. Let us turn our memories to a sound that used to echo through the alleyways, bringing joy to every child who heard it. The loud, booming explosion of the old popcorn cannon. You would see the old man set up his blackened iron pressure vessel over a small, glowing coal fire at the corner of the street. We would run home, grab a small bowl of raw corn or rice, and join the excited crowd of children forming around him. The old man would turn the handle slowly, the gears clicking rhythmically as the pressure built up inside the heavy iron belly. We watched in absolute awe, smelling the faint sweetness of saccharin warming up in the cold air. Then came the magical moment. He would stand up, place a long canvas sack over the opening, and yell for us to cover our ears. We would squeeze our eyes shut and press our hands over our ears, waiting for the massive bang. A huge cloud of white, sweet-smelling steam would erupt into the air, and suddenly our small bowls were filled with warm, perfectly puffed grains. It was a theatrical performance, a community event, and a delicious treat, all rolled into one unforgettable experience. Do you remember the magic of outdoor movie night? It did not happen very often, which made it all the more precious. When word spread that a film projector was being set up in the factory yard or the village threshing floor, the excitement was electric. Long before the sun went down, families would carry their own small wooden stools and claim a spot in the dust. You could hear the crickets chirping as the darkness settled in. Then a large white canvas screen would be hoisted up between two wooden poles, fluttering slightly in the evening breeze. Suddenly a bright beam of light would cut through the dusty night air, illuminating the swirling dust motes, accompanied by the loud rhythmic clicking of the reel-to-reel projector. The sound was often scratchy, and the picture would sometimes jump or burn, but we did not care. The entire community was gathered together under the vast starry sky, completely captivated by the moving images. We shared sunflower seeds, laughed together, and felt a profound sense of unity sitting shoulder to shoulder in the dark, finding wonder in the simplest of entertainments. Winter preparations in the 1970s broke another highly specific ritual: the making and storing of honeycomb coal briquettes. This is a smell I know you have not forgotten. The sharp, slightly acrid scent of coal dust and sulfur that hung in the morning air of every neighborhood. Families would buy hundreds of these cylindrical 12-hole briquettes, carefully stacking them in the narrow hallways or against the courtyard walls like precious dark towers. Keeping the small coal stove burning was an art form. You had to use long, heavy iron tongs to precisely align the holes of the new briquette with the glowing red one beneath it, so the fire would not suffocate. Waking up in a freezing room, you could hear the scraping of the iron stove lid as someone hurried to revive the dying embers. The coal dust got on our hands, our faces, and our clothes, but that small glowing stove was the beating heart of the home. It cooked our meals, boiled our water, and provided the small circle of radiant heat around which the entire family huddled on the darkest, coldest nights of the year. Let us sweeten our memories for a moment and think of the legendary White Rabbit creamy candy. In an era when sugar was a strictly rationed luxury, finding one of those iconic blue and white wrappers in your pocket was like discovering a hidden treasure. We usually only saw them during the spring festival. Do you remember the ritual of eating one? You would carefully twist open the waxed paper wrapper, revealing the cylindrical candy. But the most magical part was the thin, transparent layer of edible rice paper wrapped around the sweet itself. As a child, it felt like a delightful trick that you were allowed to eat the paper. You would put it in your mouth, and the rice paper would instantly melt on your tongue, followed by the dense, chewy, deeply milky sweetness of the candy. It was tough at first, making your jaw work hard, but slowly it became soft, filling your senses with a rich dairy flavor that was incredibly rare back then. That single piece of candy was meant to be savored for a very long time. A tiny, joyous celebration of sweetness amidst a life of strict discipline. When the sun went down and the neighborhood grew quiet, a familiar, comforting sound would echo from behind closed doors. The fast, rhythmic clacking of the pedal-operated sewing machine, usually a Flying Man or a Butterfly brand. This heavy iron machine, mounted on a wooden table with a cast-iron foot treadle, was one of the most valuable possessions a family could own. I can still picture mothers sitting under the dim yellow glow of a single incandescent bulb, her foot rocking the heavy iron pedal back and forth, guiding the fabric with tired but precise hands. You could smell the distinct odor of machine oil used to keep the gears running smoothly. Clothes were never thrown away. When knees tore, they were patched. When a child grew taller, pant legs were lengthened with strips of different colored fabric. The sound of that sewing machine was the sound of a mother's tireless love. She stayed up late into the night fighting off sleep, ensuring that her children would look presentable and stay warm, stitching together the fabric of our family with every single push of the pedal. Another daily necessity that held a permanent place in our homes was the bamboo or tin-cased thermos flask. Hot water was the cure for everything, from a cold winter morning to a troubled stomach. These tall, elegant flasks contained a fragile, silvered glass liner inside. Do you remember the loud, high-pitched squeak of the wooden cork stopper being pushed firmly into the neck of the flask? Over time, the cork would swell from the steam and take on a soft, waterlogged texture. Pouring the water was a delicate task, You had to angle it just right to avoid splashing boiling water onto the floor or shattering the fragile glass liner on a freezing day. The outer casings were often decorated with painted landscapes, mandarin ducks, or bright flowers. When a glass liner broke, it sounded like a small bomb going off in the kitchen, and it was a genuine household tragedy. We would sweep up the glittering silver shards and rush to the store to buy a replacement liner, because a home without a functioning thermos of boiling water was simply not a home at all. Let us think about our feet for a moment, and the ubiquitous green canvas liberation shoes we all wore. These simple rubber-soled shoes were practically the uniform of an entire generation. They were incredibly flexible, allowing us to run, climb trees, and kick makeshift footballs in the dusty alleys. But what I remember most is the smell. A strong, unmistakable scent of cured rubber mixed with the sweat of endless childhood running. When they got dirty, which was every single day, washing them was a precise ritual. We would scrub the canvas with a stiff brush and yellow soap, but the crucial step was drying them. You had to wrap the wet green canvas tightly in white toilet paper before leaving them out in the blazing sun. If you forgot this step, the sun would bake the canvas and turn it a faded, ugly yellow. Taking the dry toilet paper off the next day, peeling away the crisp white shell to reveal the vibrant green fabric underneath, felt incredibly satisfying. Those thin rubber soles let us feel every stone and bump in the road, connecting us directly to the earth we walked upon. Before the days of buying warm clothes at the shopping mall, winter warmth came directly from the hands of our mothers and grandmothers in the form of hand-knitted sweaters. Buying new yarn was a luxury, so we often repurposed what we had. Do you recall the tedious process of unraveling an old, outgrown sweater? You would sit holding your hands wide apart while your mother rapidly wound the crinkly used yarn into a tight ball. The yarn was washed and hung to dry so it would straighten out. Then the rhythmic clicking of bamboo knitting needles would begin. It was a slow, deliberate process. Every few days you would be called over to stand still while a half-finished, scratchy wool sleeve was measured against your arm. These sweaters were never knitted to fit you perfectly. They were always made just a little too large, with the sleeves rolled up, because you were expected to grow into them over the next few years. Wearing one of those heavy sweaters, smelling faintly of old wool and camphor, was like wearing a physical manifestation of your mother's patience and care. The sound of doing laundry in the 1970s was not the hum of an electric washing machine, but the harsh, grating scrub of clothes against a wooden washboard. In the communal courtyards, women would gather around the single outdoor water tap. I remember the sight of their hands, turned bright red and raw from plunging them into freezing, icy water in the dead of winter. They would rub the heavy cotton trousers and work shirts vigorously against the ribbed wooden surface, creating a thick lather with a block of cheap, potent yellow soap that smelled strongly of lye. But this was not just a chore, it was a social gathering. As the scrub boards clattered, the women exchanged neighborhood news, shared their worries, and laughed together. The washboard itself, worn smooth in the center from years of relentless friction, was a testament to the incredibly hard physical labor required just to keep a family clean. When we look back at those worn-out wooden boards, we are looking at the silent, enduring strength of the women who held our world together. Childhood in those days was remarkably free of complicated toys. We made our own fun in the dusty hutongs and dirt roads. One of the most beloved games was rolling the iron hoop. It was a masterpiece of simplicity, just a thick iron wire bent into a large circle, and a metal rod with a U-shaped hook at the end to guide it. You could hear a child coming from a mile away by the sharp, metallic clinking sound the hoop made as it bounced over uneven cobblestones. The skill required was immense. You had to keep the hoop perfectly balanced, running at a steady pace, guiding it around sharp corners and over potholes without letting it fall flat in the dust. We would run for hours, our faces smeared with dirt, our hearts pounding, racing our friends from one end of the alley to the other. There were no batteries to charge, no screens to stare at. Just a piece of scrap metal, the open air, and the limitless, joyful energy of a childhood spent outdoors, feeling the wind rushing past our faces. We cannot talk about the 70s without remembering the heart and soul of urban life, the crowded, chaotic, but deeply loving communal courtyards. We called them the Dasein. Living quarters were incredibly cramped, often just one or two small rooms for an entire family. Because space was tight, life spilled out into the shared courtyard. There were no secrets here. When dinner time arrived, the air filled with a chaotic symphony of sizzling woks, and you knew exactly what every family was cooking just by the smell of the garlic, vinegar, and hot oil. If a mother ran out of salt, she simply walked a few steps and borrowed a pinch from Auntie Wang next door. If a child fell and scraped a knee, 3 different neighbors would rush over to help before the parents even knew what happened. Yes, it was loud, and sometimes there were arguments over shared clotheslines or water usage, but there was an unparalleled sense of belonging. You were raised not just by your parents, but by a sprawling, fiercely protective extended family of neighbors who looked out for each other. When a child fell ill with a high fever or a terrible cough, there was only one true medicine that we all longed for: a cold, heavy glass jar of canned yellow peaches. In an era when fresh fruit was scarce and expensive, this sweet preserve was a miracle cure. Do you remember the cold touch of the heavy glass jar against your feverish skin? The tin lid was often difficult to pry open, requiring a knife or a spoon to break the vacuum seal with a satisfying pop. Inside were perfectly smooth, bright golden halves of peaches swimming in a thick, glorious syrup. Your mother would carefully spoon out a single peach half into a porcelain bowl, making sure to pour a generous amount of the sweet syrup over it. The soft, slippery texture of the cold peach sliding down a sore throat brought instant comfort. We believed wholeheartedly that those yellow peaches had magical healing properties. Perhaps they did, because the real medicine was the rare taste of absolute sweetness and the gentle, worried love in our mother's eyes as he watched us eat. As the 1980s slowly approached, a new sound began to infiltrate our quiet neighborhoods: the soft hiss of the cassette recorder. These large, rectangular bricks of plastic and metal were a revelation. They usually had a handle, thick buttons that required a hard press to click into place, and the magical double cassette deck. I remember the intricate process of trying to record a song from the radio, waiting in absolute silence with a finger hovering over the record and play buttons, hoping the announcer would not talk over the music. We would trade copied tapes with friends, the magnetic ribbon often getting tangled, requiring us to carefully wind it back in using a yellow pencil. And behind closed doors, with the volume turned down low, we listened to the sweet, forbidden melodies of Teresa Teng. Her soft, gentle voice singing about love and moonlight felt like a warm breeze blowing through the strict, disciplined world we knew. That cassette player was our very first window into a wider, more romantic world, opening our minds one magnetic tape at a time. Not all memories are entirely sweet. Some come with a distinct physical sensation, like the dreaded day of the haircut in the alleyway. We did not go to fancy salons. Instead, a neighbor or a grandfather would pull up a small wooden stool in the courtyard and bring out the cold, terrifying manual hair clippers. Do you remember the heavy metallic feel of that tool? It had 2 handles that you had to squeeze repeatedly to make the teeth move. Because they were rarely sharpened properly, the clippers did not just cut the hair, They often grabbed and pulled it straight from the scalp. I can still feel the sharp, sudden pinch at the back of my neck and hear the metallic crunching sound right next to my ear. You had to sit absolutely still, freezing in the winter air, while the rough metal scraped against your skin. A towel was tucked tightly into your collar to keep the itchy hair out of your shirt. It was an uncomfortable ordeal, but when it was over, you were sent off with a clean, cropped head, entirely ready for the season ahead. When the bitter winter wind swept through the streets, freezing our cheeks, it also brought one of the most beautiful sights and sounds of the season, the Bintang Hulu vendor. You could hear him long before you saw him. He would draw out a long melodic shout that echoed off the brick walls. He carried a heavy straw post resting on his shoulder, and sticking out of it were dozens of bamboo skewers loaded with bright red glistening hawthorn berries, all coated in a thick transparent shell of hardened sugar syrup. The contrast between the freezing air and the bright red fruit was stunning. When you finally convinced your parents to buy you one, the first bite was unforgettable. You had to bite hard to crack the thick, glass-like shell of the frozen sugar. It shattered in your mouth with a loud crunch, immediately giving way to the soft, intensely sour, grainy flesh of the red hawthorn berry inside. The perfect balance of extreme sweetness and sharp sourness, eaten while shivering in the snow, remains the absolute defining flavor of my childhood winters. Finally, we come to the most profound ritual we have lost in this modern age of instant messaging. The beautiful, agonizing art of writing and waiting for handwritten letters. I remember smoothing out the thin, delicate stationery paper, often printed with faint red lines. We used fountain pens, dipping the nib into a glass bottle of blue-black ink. Every character had to be written slowly, deliberately, because you could not simply hit a backspace key if you made a mistake. You poured your heart onto that paper, folded it carefully, licked the sweet-tasting glue on the edge of the envelope, and pressed a colorful stamp into the corner. And then you waited. You waited days, sometimes weeks, for the letter to travel across provinces on slow green trains. When the postman finally arrived on his green bicycle and handed you a weathered envelope with a familiar handwriting, your heart would race. You held in your hands a physical piece of someone's time, their touch, and their thoughts. We did not just communicate back then. We cherished each other through the profound beauty of anticipation. My dear friend, as we reach the end of our journey today, it becomes clear what we are truly nostalgic for. We do not just miss the heavy bicycles, the chipped enamel mugs, or the taste of rationed candy. We miss who we were when we held those things in our hands. We miss our youth. We miss our parents, who are perhaps no longer with us, and we desperately miss the intense, unbreakable connection we shared with one another when life was simpler, slower, and required us to lean on each other to survive. That era forged a generation of resilient, deeply loving people, and those memories are a treasure no one can ever take away from us. If this video brought a tear to your eye or a warm smile to your face, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to take these beautiful trips down memory lane together. Now, I want to ask you a question. Out of all the 20 things we talked about today, which one brings back your strongest, most emotional childhood memory? Please write your personal story in the comments below. Let us build our own digital courtyard here, where we can share our history and keep the spirit of those golden days alive forever. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.